Welcome to Together, a higher ed podcast where we bring you stories, insights, and experiences from voices across the higher education sector. I'm Chase Haygood, the Vice Provost for Student Success at the University of Utah, and today I'm really thrilled to be joined by Geoffrey Landward, the Commissioner of the Utah System of Higher Education. Welcome to the podcast, Commissioner Landward.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
We're really excited that you're here. When I think folks think about systems of higher education and as one group, we'll call it systemness, I think most folks either commissioner or president or chancellor of that system. So it's a thrill to sit down with you and kind of talk about your perspective and how you got to where you are and the journey along the way. So I'd like to, if we can, to start there. Share a little bit, if you're willing, about your journey into higher ed and your role within the Utah system of higher ed.
I would love to. It's interesting. It's almost a etched in the DNA of my family. My father was in higher education. He was a dean of students at Salt Lake Community College. I remember early memories of being on that campus when it was Utah Tech. Now we have a whole different kind of Utah Tech.
Yeah.
And from early on, hearing him talk about college, hearing him talk about students, seeing him interact with students, the electricity that you feel when you're on a campus and watching people learn. So, and then my uncle, Stainer Landward, was the dean of students here at the U. And watching he and my father interact and talk about higher education, it was just something that I was exposed to early on. And like many, I think, young kids watching their fathers or their mothers in their professional lives, you naturally latch on to what they do and aspire to maybe be involved in what they do. And so for me, part of it was seeing what my father did, but also part of it was just catching the feeling of what it's like to be on a campus and wanting to be involved. But I think, and so in the back of my mind, I think I was wanting to be in education somehow. When I went to college, that's where the fire ignited. That's where the spark of my imagination of what it could be like to have a career in higher education truly took place. And that was because, to be quite frank, I did not enjoy high school. I did not enjoy junior high. I don't know many people that did. And so I was looking forward to college, but I had no idea how much I would enjoy the experience of moving away from home, going to a university, and then having the opportunity to sit in these classrooms with these exceptional faculty who are so knowledgeable in these areas and being exposed to so many different things, being able to take classes in child psychology, in physics, in the history of music, and having the ability to learn about things that I'd never really been able to study before in a setting that I've never really been in before. I knew that I was hooked. I wanted to be involved somehow. And when I went to college, the plan was I wanted to teach, and I wanted to be a biology teacher. I love science, still do love science, and I love teaching. So I had majored in biology teaching, done all of the coursework, was about to start student teaching, and had an identity crisis. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be, the high school teacher. And from a personal note, there are all sorts of pressures that you have in thinking, well, if I start a family, can I support a family? Which is
Sure.
A sad commentary on the teaching profession, that these are choices that people have to make.
Yep.
Can I afford to be a teacher as a career? And so I decided that I would change a major. Now, staying on brand, I was absolutely committed to being done in 4 years, as should everybody that's listening to this podcast.
At least less than 6.
Less than 6, please.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I did not want to stay another year beyond what I needed to, so I looked for whatever major I could do in 1 year.
Yep.
And that was sociology. And I looked at that. I could do it in 2 semesters, and I had no idea what sociology was. Sounded like just something I would do. First class that I took in sociology, it was, I think almost the entire BYU football team was there.
Yeah.
Evidently, they also liked sociology. It's something to do with, I don't know. But
being social.
being social. Yeah, they'd like to take the same classes together.
Yeah.
It's a team thing.
Right.
I had no idea that I would be captivated with sociology immediately. Fell in love with it. It was just fascinating. I find people fascinating. Now you get to study people acting not as an individual, but as a group.
Yeah.
And as a population and what that means and how that works. And so I switched and said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to be a professor of sociology. And had started applying to graduate schools, was admitted to a graduate school, was going to do master's and PhD and do all of the things. And I was excited. I took sort of a gap year, was working at the university at the time, and was serving on committees, because if you're going to work at a university, you're going to be on a committee.
Sure.
At least 7
Mm-hmm.
or 8.
Yeah.
So
Minimum threshold.
Minimum threshold.
Yep.
And I was on a committee of other faculty and other administrators. And one of these faculty pulled me aside. It was a law school faculty. Asked me what my plan was, and told him about my thinking on going into academia. And he just said, look, I'm going to suggest something. I think you should think about law school. And we talked about it, what do your grades look like? I said, this is what they are. He's like, look, I think you should think about just taking the LSAT. So I took the LSAT with the idea of, if I get a certain score, then I will go. If I don't, then I will just stick with the plan.
Sure.
Took the LSAT, got the score, and just decided to do it. And so I went to law school, and I remember applying to law schools and talking to law school faculty at different law schools about that, and the students, and they would ask me like, well, what area of law? I'm like, not really sure. Like, well, what kind of career? And I said, I want to be a law professor. And most of the time I was met with them trying to suppress the laughter. They're like, well,
they're like, I'm doing this. Why in the world would you want to do this?
Like, why? Yeah, it almost felt more like who do you think you are? It was a, well, you're not going to Harvard, so I don't know, good luck. That sounds great. You should still come to our law school and study. And so, I quickly realized that, look, I'm not going to have a career in academia. My mind isn't built for it. And I was fine with that. I accepted that. The law school faculty that I interacted with, it didn't take long to learn that these are very intelligent, smart people. And I was self-actualized enough to know that I was not at that level, nor would I ever be. And so my respect for their role skyrocketed. What I was told early on was, it's great if you want to be a law professor, but if you want to be successful, you need to go practice law.
Right.
And so I went to law school, no idea what I would do. It was a recession at the time. It was the early 2000s, and so there weren't a lot of jobs to be had. I was interning at the Utah Attorney General's office, doing employment law litigation with them. And they were very clear when I started there as an intern that they don't hire interns. They only hire experienced lawyers, but this could be a good experience. But as I neared the end of that 2-year term as an intern with them, they did approach me and said, look, we would like to actually hire you, but you have to pass the bar. We can't help you. We have no resources. You're going to have to study on your own. And if you don't pass the bar, you don't get a job. And so the stakes weren't very high at all. Right? And so took the bar, passed the bar, got that job, started litigating, didn't know what I was doing. And realized after about a year of doing trial work, jury trials, my first jury trial, in fact, was defending the University of Utah.
All right.
Yeah, a professor who didn't get tenure.
Oh.
So that was my introduction to the captivating world of tenure decisions. Having litigated that,
This
in
podcast could go in a very different direction.
Is that what you'd like to talk about?
Let's put that one on hold.
Okay, let's bookmark that.
Yeah. We'll put a not so bright pin on tenure decisions.
Tenure decisions. We won, by the way.
Ooh.
Yeah, jury loved it. What they didn't love is me. So I learned early on that maybe trial work wasn't for me. It was fascinating. It's like a chess game, but I didn't like the dramatics of it, the gamesmanship of it. I just wanted to make legal arguments. I wanted to write. I wanted to research. And so I moved to the Department of Workforce Services and worked there for a decade. And eventually, in the back of my mind, I got to work with people like Phyllis Vedder and others at the university, because I was defending the universities in these lawsuits. And in the back of my mind was the seed of like, well, maybe I could do that one day. Maybe I could work at a counsel's office at a university one day. But for now, that career path wasn't really open to me because, Phyllis, to her credit, hires good lawyers. And I hadn't made that list yet. And so I had to just be realistic. So I had this career path in front of me. I was working at Workforce Services, and eventually I was given more and more administrative responsibilities, and the work that I was doing in the legal area was replaced with more administrative responsibilities until eventually they asked me to be the deputy director of Workforce Services and step away from the general counsel role. So I did that for 2 years and learned quite a bit, but I also missed practicing law, and I wanted to get back to practicing law. And I thought, now's the time maybe to see if I could find something in higher ed, to practice law in higher ed. Yeah. And so I started putting my feelers out. I had made some connections. One of the connections I'd made was the Commissioner of Higher Education, the late Dave Buehler. And so I was looking at a position at one of our local universities and asked him to be a reference. He said yes. I didn't even get an interview at that university. They're in the system. I'm not going to call them out.
Ooh.
No, but their colors are green. Astrid.
And you have a long memory.
I do. I will never forget.
I love it.
They made the right choice. In the end, they made a very good choice, and it wasn't me. But it was interesting because then I got a call a few months later from Dave Buehler, the commissioner, saying, "I'm wondering if you're still interested in higher ed." I had taken another job at the time. I was just 6 months in. And I said, "I would love to, but I just took this job. I'm liking it, and I appreciate it." And I said, "Can you just tell me a little bit about the job while we're on the phone?" And he told me about the job, and I said, "This is not what I wanted to hear," because it sounded perfect.
Yeah.
And it was one of those early lessons that I think many people have learned in the course of their life, which is the timing is never good for big decisions. If you're waiting for the timing to be right, you're always going to be waiting.
Yeah.
So I made the decision to take the job and gave my apologies to the Department of Health about the short stint, but they completely understood. They were gracious and supportive. And I went and worked for the commissioner's office as counsel. And then over time, the same phenomenon happened, which is I was given more administrative responsibilities and had more of my legal work taken and given to other people. The moral of this story is that I'm not supposed to be a lawyer. I should not be practicing law. And every place that I've worked has recognized this and started to slowly pull the legal work away and give me other things, other duties as assigned. I will tell you this, Chase, not in my wildest dreams, up to and including the day that the board asked me to be the interim commissioner, had I wanted to or thought that I would be commissioner of higher education. First, because I didn't know what that job was. Most people don't.
Sure.
And we can talk about that.
Yeah.
I think we will. Yeah. But it was one of those things where I was working in higher ed. I love higher ed. I absolutely adore and cherish higher education. And because of the passion that I feel for it, the policy issues, the legal issues, the leadership issues, everything that higher ed was confronting, I was voraciously taking in and trying to find solutions and loving every minute of it. For whatever reason, the board saw something in me and asked that I take that interim role and then help them guide a search for a replacement of the commissioner, which was the agreement, which was, I don't want to be the commissioner. I will serve as interim. Let's do a search and find a great person.
Yeah.
And then over the course of a few months, they pulled me aside and said, "Look, we're really happy with what you're doing. We'd like you to serve in this role." Of course, I knew deep down that it was a mistake, but I was so honored and willing to do whatever I could to work in higher education and play whatever role I could play to help, that I accepted that offer, and here we are. Now I'm on a podcast with Chase. I mean,
Right.
career pinnacles, career goals. I couldn't be more thrilled. I couldn't be more honored, and I couldn't be more intimidated by the job and the scope of it. But that's the journey. It wasn't planned,
Yeah.
and here we are.
So I want to start at the very, you said something just there, not about Pinnacle on being on our podcast, but the notion of the job to some extent intimidating you, or, forcing you to come to grips with, I'm really, what I hear is I'm really excited to help. I'm really excited by the challenges. Do you think most people get there in their job? Like they're in a job that they're kind of like, oh, all right. And what do you do with that? I mean, what is like, is you wake up every day and you're kind of like, all right, I'm headed in. Board has trusted me. Like if folks, so as I talk to graduate students, both here and throughout the country, they're like, okay, you're working in higher ed. I'm wondering if this is true for you. So I'm going to try to get this in the form of a question. Like I think of any of our roles the further you move up in any kind of organization, right? As the commissioner, the provost, vice provost, presidents, you're a leader of leaders.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
And there's all the leadership scholarship about, and even, Lincoln's team of rivals and, all of that. The ability to pull people together, get them there, keep them there. Is that part of the challenge? Like you unpack a little bit about like the role, the job in and of itself. Is there something that's exciting about that? As you get up every morning and you're like, okay, I'm going to go grapple with some pretty big issues that you might not even see the end of the work, right?
Yeah.
Because it seems like, from my perspective, watching commissioners or chancellors of systems, you're putting things in motion that there's a short game, but most of it seems like the long game.
Yeah. No,
by its very nature of leading a system.
It is. It's all long game. The scope of it is massive. And to your earlier part of your question, it feels like I'm a walking rabid case of imposter syndrome. This feeling of, as I mentioned, I stand in awe of the level of intellectual talent at these universities. Being able to work with faculty in any capacity can be intimidating. And here I'm taking on a role where I'm having to, as you've said, put into motion things that feel so completely beyond the scope of my capabilities, including managing a system where I have 16 presidents of institutions who are all highly intelligent, highly talented individuals, taking on the impossible task of trying to run these institutions. And I'm being tasked with bringing them together and trying to unify them towards things that they may not agree with. Is a daunting task, one that I was truly intimidated by. And the very fact that I'm coming into this role, yes, I've been working in higher ed for 10 years now, but these are individuals who have been working in higher ed for decades, who have proven leadership and academic backgrounds that are just staggering. And so I'm coming in and being asked to lead in this fashion it was a very difficult thing for me to come to grips with. But I will tell you that this group of presidents that I'm working with now, the board that I'm working with, who are the same thing. These are individuals who have started major corporations and run major organizations, exceptionally talented and successful individuals. And I'm thinking to myself, why would they choose me to do something, with the circles that they've run in for their entire careers? These are the inadequacies that I'm laying bare here in your podcast. I'm sure I'm thrilled that this will be made public.
Well, so part of it, one, I'm really grateful that you're willing to be quite candid about it. I mean, because I think that there are a lot of folks. So folks are either first gen to college or first gen in kind of the professional class who face the same kind of things that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Right? Who, if they're up from the working class, I happen to be, who find every day the work that you do is just a privilege. It's kind of
Yes.
like, I mean, this is amazing work.
It is.
I mean, it's just like, I'm being paid to do this.
Yeah.
I'm being paid to engage in work that will, if we're doing everything that we can, we're not going to get it right all the time, but if we're doing everything we can, it has the very real potential to change people's lives and generations ahead of them that we get to be a small part of.
It absolutely does, and I think that's how I feel about it. And the reason why I like having a conversation like this with people is because I'm trying to approach this role with the very genuine humility that I have, which is, look, I just want to help. The only agenda I have is to ensure that higher education is set up to thrive in the long term. And what has become a very challenging time in which that is, for the first time in my life, a valid question to ask.
Yeah.
And that's terrifying to me. And I know it's terrifying to anyone that works in this community. And it puts me in a position to have to lead out on things that are simply difficult issues. And it puts me in a position very publicly to have to try and navigate things that the people that I respect, the people that I look to in awe, may disagree with, may feel like it's a betrayal of what they think we should be doing. And that's hard for me. That's hard for me to reconcile because of how much respect I have for everyone and anyone who works in higher education and how important it is to me. But at the same time, my commitment is 100% focused on we're in trouble. And there are ways for us to survive this. In fact, there are ways for us to come out of this better than we were.
Yeah.
And that's all I want to see. It's absolutely what I want to see. I want to see higher education thrive, but it will have to change. And look, to be quite candid, the politicization of higher education is something that is going to require a reckoning. And in my view of it is there are things that are critical for higher education to be successful. We have to be able to preserve our ability to pursue truth in whatever form that comes in. That's what makes higher education amazing. That's what makes it so tremendous to be a part of as a student, as a faculty member, as someone working in it. It has to be preserved. And there are structures that have been put into place to preserve that. And so we work to protect those structures. The other thing is people come to our institutions to be challenged. And to be challenged means you have to be confronted with ideas that you either disagree with or had not had the opportunity to hear. And they may make you uncomfortable. They may seem abhorrent. They may seem contrary to your worldview. And it is our job in higher education to challenge those worldviews. And you cannot do that if you aren't setting up your institutions to be able to have those debates and to do so free from interference and free from retribution. These are bedrock principles that I am absolutely furiously working to protect. But there are things in higher education that we have to confront and that we have to solve, and that's what we're going to work to do. The one thing that I will say about the career path that I took is that I wanted to be on a campus because there is nothing like being on a campus. There's nothing like being around students. There's nothing like being around faculty in their element and watching them do the things that they do best. I'm at the gateway in a mall on the fifth floor of a building across from the Delta Center. And
it's a nice location.
It's a great location.
Yeah.
And I have a nice office.
Yeah.
I get to watch the jazz players come in and park their very nice cars.
Sure.
And walk into the building. I can watch that from my window.
But very few students, I would imagine.
Not really many students. And so the work that I do is outside of the campus And it really is, as you talked about, running a system is much different than running a campus. And I'm in the nexus of many different worlds. I'm in the nexus of our political leadership. I'm in the nexus of all 16 institutions. I am working in partnership with K through 12. I have community partnerships and stakeholders that I get to work with, and the administration and leadership of the institutions. But it is a much different world and a much different skill set that is asked of someone running a system than it is of someone running a campus. And the issues are different, and the decision points are different. And I get exposure to things like being able to visit your academic senate, for example.
Yep.
Very intimidating group, by the way, especially when they all have senator right in front of their name. That
Right.
doesn't help.
Right.
It's bad enough professor. Now you got to do senator.
Right.
Yeah, that was
And then you get asked the question, and the response is, "Thank you, Senator. Yes."
yes, senator.
Yep.
So it's a very difficult world to navigate. There are a lot of stakeholders that I have to make sure that I'm understanding their needs, their concerns, and trying to find solutions that will work for everybody. And this idea that you brought up of systemness
Yeah.
is a concept that unless you're working directly on issues that involve a system, it's not a concept people think about, nor would they.
Sure.
It's a kind of a dumb word, really, but it's a word that is a term of art in higher education.
Yep.
My view of it is pretty simple. When we talk about a system, there are advantages to being in a system, and there are disadvantages as well. But the advantages can outweigh those disadvantages. But my frustration with the system is, if you're going to do it so that you're capitalizing on those advantages.
Sure.
And I think what I see and what I have seen here in Utah is that we're operating in a system, but we are not capitalizing on the opportunities that a system can bring. We're getting closer now, and that's what drives me, is that, look, we're in a system that can benefit every single institution in it. All the institutions can be better because of the system if we do it in the right way and we capitalize on those advantages. And I don't think our institutions are realizing the potential of a system. And there are reasons why we haven't gotten there that we can talk about.
Sure.
But and so when I look at my role is not to run your universities. I'm not capable of doing that. I don't have the right skill set or experience to do that. And that's not the job that I'm in. I'm hoping that I can use the skills that I do have to be successful in this particular role. And being able to talk about that role, talk about the challenges, talk about what I'm trying to do in this role is a great opportunity, because it's not something that people think about, need to know about, unless they are affected by it. And then suddenly they're like, wait
a second.
What is the system doing?
What are they doing
How
in the
dare they?
gateway?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I get an angry phone call from Chase. I'm like, what are you doing?
Right.
Do you have any idea the consequences of your decision making?
Downstream. We're looking downstream.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So I want to come back around to kind of potential opportunities for systemness, or within, universities and colleges working inside a system to see those potentials. So I want to come back to that in a second. I want to back up, though, in part of the journey, part of your story. I think it is truly rare that any person will have one, not to mention two, deans of students in their life.
Yeah,
Like growing, if I heard you right, your father and your uncle.
that's right.
The issues, like the folks who may be listening, watching, who have a dean of student in their life.
Yeah.
I mean, or anybody who's working in an assistant VP, an associate VP for student affairs role that may have the / dean of students. Our dean of students, Jason Ramirez, is amazing.
Yes.
The things, okay, like for me, watching, because I think you're right. I've got a 4-year-old son. He has conversations with me and my partner, his mother, who we're both in higher ed. She's in the University System of Georgia. I work here at the University of Utah.
Yes.
So much of our dinner table conversation, if we're not careful, moves straight into higher ed. I don't know that I've shared the story with you before, but I'll make it quick. A couple months ago, we realized, right, okay, he's now kind of coming of age that he's listening to every single word. He's watching tone. He's watching like body language. So at one point, this is probably a year ago now, we're talking, and all of a sudden he starts saying, dashboards, 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 dashboards. And it's like, oh, all right. So, I mean, are there instances from a young age, I'm wondering, where you got your father, you got your uncle, potential like role models, you're watching them do their work. I mean, deans of students, I mean, that is probably one of the hardest jobs on any campus.
Yes.
Anywhere.
Yes.
No matter the size of the institution.
Yep.
Because you're dealing with like individual by individual students, like many of us do, but like they're dealing with frontline, especially now, mental health issues. They're dealing with housing insecurities. They're dealing with food insecurities. They're dealing with, they help steward the line between, okay, you stopped going to class, you earned an F. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about all the reasons why that happened. And then the whole story gets told typically to the dean of students or somebody in that office.
Yeah.
You talk just a little bit about like what that was like watching your dad and your uncle, and I mean it drove you as I heard you describe it, Jeff. Like, okay, I want to do something like that.
Yeah.
But that had to be fascinating. I mean, as a kid, like 6-year-old, 7-year-old, all the way up through teenage years, like watching them do their work.
Yeah. It was fascinating. It was formative. I think it's very easy for me to say that when it comes to student affairs, it's something that stirs those memories and stirs the passions that were instilled into me because of those experiences so early on. Seeing my father sit with students and work with them. I mean, I have very clear memories of him taking me with him to work sometimes. It was, any child who got to go to work with their mom or dad, I think probably remembers those experiences as so exciting, being able to go to the office and see him work, but in particular with students. But it was not just seeing him. The way he talked about students and the way he talked about their challenges and the thrill and satisfaction and fulfillment he got from students coming to him with a problem and him solving the problem for the student was, I think, transformative. It was something that probably at the time I didn't recognize how much of an impact it was having on my view of working with and being with students, but it certainly did. And then throughout the opportunities I've had in this career, when it comes to student issues and student services and student affairs, it's an area where I have had particular interest and passion because of those years and because of seeing the impact that it had on the students that he was working with. Salt Lake Community College, at the time, Utah Technical College, these were students who were facing barriers to success in higher education, and listening to how they would find ways to address those barriers, whether it was barriers of cost or healthcare or academic advising and things, tutoring, disability services. So many of the things that he was working with and the stories that he would tell were so. I admired so much the work he was doing and the impact that it was having, and to be able to see that at such a young age, I think speaks to how important that work is. And I just wanted to be in a situation where I got to work with students and help students because of that. And with my uncle and listening to the stories that he had to tell, I mean, the things students can get up to at your university, just the creativity.
Right.
Of
the curiosity.
The curiosity
and
and the circumstances that they can put themselves in.
Minds eager to learn.
Eager to learn.
Many things.
Boundaries eager to test.
Yeah.
And but also really major problems. And then I get to then start working in higher education, and I get an opportunity to start working with deans of students and VPs of student affairs, and to see the scope of what you have to deal with in this area. Heartbreaking things.
Yep.
That these student affairs and student services professionals have to deal with. It is a thankless job. It seems relentless, but also, if we're not helping students be successful in these universities, I don't know what we're doing.
Yep.
At that point.
Yep.
I don't know why we're here.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that as more and more generations continue to come to college, we see more and more challenges that they're facing that are more and more complicated. And the stress and level of obligation that student affairs professionals have now, much higher than when my father was doing it, and much more important. And so this is another area where the questions that we get to ask is, okay, you're on the ground here at the university working with students directly. I'm not. We're in an office working as a system. The balance is, what can we do as a system that can help versus what are we doing as a system that's getting in the way? These are always the questions that I'm trying to ask. And
Sure.
Student affairs is a perfect example. It's like, what's the proper role? And anytime I can do something that I feel like we've made a difference in helping the people who are working with the students do their jobs better, then that is so gratifying for me.
I appreciate that. I appreciate the perspective, especially because I think that's really unique. I didn't know that about you. I didn't know that there were because again, I think one dean of students.
Yeah.
Because how many institutions? 1,400, something like that. Public colleges, universities throughout the country. So about 1,400 or so deans of students.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a small group, and talk about vice presidents. I think about the highs and lows that they experience in one day, and then the highs and lows across one academic year, and then the highs and lows of students across a whole career. And I am on incredibly firm ground when I say our vice president for student affairs, Lori McDonald, I think is the best in the business. I've studied universities, I've worked at a couple, I've consulted, as no doubt you are in conversation with folks throughout the industry, throughout the sector. I don't know if there's anybody better.
You have absolutely one of the very best. And not only one of the very best vice presidents of student affairs, but one of the very best people. She's just an exceptional person. And frankly, it almost seems like that is a job requirement.
Yeah.
Because working in this area, first and foremost, you have to be a good person, an empathetic person, a person who is willing to listen, a person who's willing to support and help and understand. Few better than Lori.
Yeah. Who just cares. I've watched Lori do her work now 3.5 years. She was on a group that interviewed me, so I got to know her even before I got to Utah. And then just watching her do her work, lead her teams through, again, good times and some of the most challenging times. Also a former dean of students,
yes,
Lori McDonald.
That's right.
I want to pivot us, if I can, to
Sure.
potentials, like the notion of how systems work, what potential looks like, as if and as and when we can work, universities and colleges together through system leadership. What are some of the things you're most excited about within the state of Utah as the system comes together and we work and move as system? What are some of the potential things that are out on the horizon that you get really excited about?
There's a couple things. One, the presidents that we have at our institutions in this system right now are exceptional leaders who have a broader vision than just solely the success of their institution. And first and foremost, that has to be there in order for a system to work. These jobs, being a president, the pressures are immense, and from so many different places. The pressures to raise money, the pressures to raise enrollment, the pressures to get new buildings, the pressures to raise in the rankings and all of these things. I get it. And what I'm asking of institutions in order for a system to work is the backbone of a good system, the DNA of a good system is a clear understanding of the role that each institution plays within the system, and they are not the same role. And that means they do not do the same thing. Now, I mean, I've been vocal about this, and I will just preface this by saying I get that it's controversial. But it is human nature, I think, for all of us to want to progress, right? We want to keep building on what we have and become more, and I think that's the right thing, and we all do that, and I think that's what we all want, personally, professionally, and I think institutions oftentimes want to do the same thing. I think that because there's this pressure to grow, and this pressure to attract more donors and more students and more talented faculty, that you need to build and you need to expand. And that means if you're a community college, maybe the temptation is, let's start offering more bachelor's degrees. Maybe we move towards being a state college. And if you're a state college, maybe you start moving into being a university where you start offering master's degrees. And if you're a regional university, you want to start offering more doctorate degrees. And maybe you have aspirations to be a research university, or it goes backwards. Maybe you're a research university and you're wanting to start offering more certificate programs. Well, you know, we have technical colleges in this system and they offer certificates. And so the impulse of I'm going to grow this university and expand its mission and expand its stature and its national prominence is a completely understandable, respectable plan of action for any good leader taking over an institution. And what I'm doing is coming to those leaders and saying, no. No, I need you to chart a different course. And in order for this to work, and this includes your president, Taylor Randall, who's an exceptional president.
Indeed.
By the way.
Yep.
Who has caught this vision, and it's so critical that he did. It was the one thing that gave me confidence that we could do something, is seeing that the University of Utah can be stronger because it's in a system than it can be on its own.
Yeah.
And I think to some that might be antithetical, because I think that there's a temptation, and frankly, one that we have maybe validated through some poor decisions over the course of years, that we are inhibiting the growth and potential of institutions with nonsensical policymaking and governance. And I think that that's a real danger of a system. That's one of those drawbacks I talked about.
Yep.
And so I want to avoid that danger, but recognizing that there is potential for your institution and all the institutions to benefit, but to also understand that for that to work, every institution has to be willing to A, trust the other institutions, and B, make sacrifices for the good of the system and good of the state and the students in that state. Because you do have to chart a different course. Yeah. And it is terrifying, I think, to have to advocate and say, no, we're going to stay within the role that we have, and we're going to do it well. And that means we may not expand in these areas, but we're going to do these areas better. For the University of Utah, I've said this before, but I want to have a conversation about when we talk about access to higher education. Traditionally, when we're talking about access, we're talking about community colleges, lower cost. The student services are structured differently. The instruction is structured differently. The hours of instruction are it's just a different model.
Yep.
And the reason is because not everybody is prepared to come to an AAU research university. And we should be comfortable with having that conversation.
Yep.
And then saying, well, then what does that mean for your role as a research university when we talk about access? What targets should you be looking at? And what are the interventions that you should be doing as a university around access versus solid community college? and they are not the same, nor should the expectations be the same.
Yeah.
And this gets to something that if you're wonky and you understand, and you're looking at education policy and lawmaking, you start to talk about incentives. And right now, the incentives are the University of Utah needs to grow enrollment and hit access numbers in order to qualify for certain money. And you've done exceptional work in this area. And I'm not suggesting that you stop doing work in access. What I'm suggesting is the role that the U plays in access is different than the role that Weber State plays, which is different than the role Select Community College plays, which is different than Davis Tech.
Yep.
And until we can get to a point where we accept and work within those roles and do so in a way where we're all strategically saying, if you execute your role, you, in this way, and you rely on Solid Community College to execute their role this way, you both should be benefiting.
Yeah.
But here's the problem, Chase, and it's very simple. We are not set up that way, nor are we incentivized that way.
Yeah.
So all of your institutions, all of our institutions, are essentially competing with each other for scarce resources. They all want to show growth. And in order for them to grow, they have to cannibalize somebody else. And that means oftentimes that they're competing with each other within the same system. And when you're making decisions in a competition mindset, you're not making decisions with the idea of what's best for the state of Utah. Your decisions is what's best for my institution. And again, I accept that is a perfectly valid position to take, and probably one that, because it's been incentivized, is the right position to take.
Sure.
My job is to say, there's a different way. Let's chart that course and let's see what that looks like. And then let's look at the incentives, let's look at the policies and make sure that we're not harming you for taking this different role. In fact, let's make sure that you're set up to be successful in that role, and that the expectations are, this is what success looks like for a regional university versus this is what success looks like for a research university, and that success does not look the same.
Yeah.
And so we talk about roles and specific roles and how they can build on each other so that the state of Utah is the beneficiary, so
Right.
that the students are the beneficiary, so that we have world-class research and world-class teaching and affordability and access and efficiency.
Yeah, and all that's getting covered through the system.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
what a system can do.
Right.
But it first requires a vision of what it needs to be and a course of how to get there. And we are not there yet.
So can I ask this question as we transition to kind of final question, which again is like I think the ultimate, but I think the bridge to that. One, I appreciate your thinking on it, Commissioner. I think that diversity and the differentiation between the institutions inside the one system accomplishing interlocking goals.
Yes.
That there's room and space for how we accomplish them together. Thank you for that. I appreciate that perspective. I think it can become the kind of complement between the institutions as we strive to work together. A friend of mine, here's the bridge to that final question.
Yeah.
A friend of mine will often say, because you mentioned trust, right? Part of that relies on the ability of the institutions and leaders within the institutions, folks who are stewarding institutions alongside and in collaboration with the system, to trust each other, right? A friend of mine frequently reminds me that as we go about making innovation, we go about making change, and we go about trying to grow and do, also part of your response, which I appreciate, both individually as well as large organizations that we steward and lead, that change can only move at the speed of trust.
Yeah.
And for it to be sustainable and for it to be lasting. So with that as preface, question we ask everybody is, how do we go about doing it? Advice that you have from your perspective and your career and the journey that you've had in higher ed. How is it that we collectively, and you could take it in any direction, whatever the community is, at college level, university level, system level, societal level, like the purpose and the value that we should see in higher ed, right? And its potential and its impact, its effect. how do we go about creating lasting, transformative change, and how do we go about doing it together?
I mean, look, that's a profound question to end with, and I appreciate it. I think if I had to pinpoint what I see as the absolute necessary element to seeing the kind of change that we need to have here in Utah, it is as fundamental as leadership that is built on trust and that is built on a recognition that we are all imperfect, trying to achieve difficult things together. And let me just say briefly what I mean by this. I've touched on it already, but I'm working from a system perspective. And I said this early on in working with the presidents of these institutions. They have been encouraged and incentivized to drive their institution forward. And they have had to do so sometimes at the expense of their colleagues. And over time, in my view, that has challenged the ability for them to trust each other. We have had, building over time, a growing distrust of higher education in our political leadership. And that has expanded into the general public. And I see that as such a fundamental problem, not only working with leaders within the system, but working with leaders of the state, working with leaders of families, parents, who want to be able to trust that they can send their children to our institutions, adults who can trust that if they put their career aspirations on the line by coming back to school, that we will take care of them, that what we're providing them gives value. Eroding trust, and it's not just our institutions. You know, we know that trust is eroding in institutions in general.
Right.
Trust is the fundamental building block of a society that thrives. So when I look at the challenges that we're trying to address, whether they're political, whether they're system, whether they're individual, it simply builds from, you have to trust me and I have to trust you. I have found that the most effective way that I have built trust in my relationships is to be vulnerable. So when I open up to you about how inadequate I feel in doing this job, I hope that what that achieves is that people know that I recognize that I am going to screw this up, and that when I do, I am willing to accept that and try to figure out a different way. And to be vulnerable enough to know that, hey, I messed this up, and help me take the next step till we can get this back on track. And if you're working with me and something like that happens with you, that I will accept that at the same level that I would hope that someone else would, which is, thank you for recognizing that we're all imperfect and we're all trying to achieve something here, and that I can be vulnerable enough with you to know that I have worries and I have fears, and we're going to talk about this, because if we can't be open about these issues, we're never going to solve them. So whether it's working with legislative leaders who I need to trust me and trust the presidents and trust our institutions, or the public, or the presidents, or the boards that I work with, I'm just going to be as authentic and open and vulnerable as possible. And it's a very uncomfortable position to be in. But I have never seen a better way for someone to start to understand and build trust in you and you trust in them, if you can just see into the person that they are, and what drives them, what terrifies them, their successes and their failures, and to be able to hold each other up and support each other through those things. That's an unbreakable trust that you build. Those are the opportunities I'm looking for. That's what I'm asking of other people, and I can't ask them to do that if I'm not doing that myself. That's the basis from which I'm trying to lead.
That I think is one of the most powerful answers I think I've heard to that question. And So I'm grateful to you for that.
Thank you.
The power of vulnerability in leadership in motivating people to want to tackle difficult things, right? And then, my goodness, celebrate when we chip away at something that,
Yes.
We certainly praise our predecessors, give them all due thanks, and some pretty thorny issues that as context and situations change, circumstances change, it's like, okay, we could look a different direction, or we could be brave enough and vulnerable enough together to begin chipping away at some pretty complex problems and challenges.
Yes.
Because students and future students they're depending on us to do it.
They are.
Right? Commissioner Jeff, thank you for being willing to sit down and chat. It's been really nice just to sit and talk, and I'd love to have you back on. I think that we've left some things to continue to disentangle and unpack. I'd love to have you back on if you're willing.
I would be absolutely thrilled to come back. I think this has been fantastic. I really do appreciate you taking time.
Thank you again. And thank you, viewers, listeners, for tuning in. This has been Together, a Higher Ed podcast. Tune in next time.